everybody, and welcome to Bread Garden Market's Vinofile Wine Club number 5, Old World versus New World. This is a theme I've been doing since I have been doing wine classes, so almost 20 years now. I always loved doing Old World versus New World, just for a number of reasons. They're a lot of fun, getting a real sense of, you hear a sense of, wine sommeliers or retailers talk about terroir and sense of place. This is a great way to figure out, well, what are they talking about by that? What is the difference between a French Pinot and an Oregon Pinot? Why are French, Merlot, and Cab-based wines from Bordeaux, how are they different from Merlot and Cab-based wines out of Napa or Washington, Columbia Valley? And there's a number of ways you can do this. You can certainly drink each of the wines one by one, but I think it's really great to drink these wines side by side when you're doing a tasting or a class like this. And it's even more fun, I think, to do it blind. Brown bag them, cover them with something, taste them side by side, and see if you can distinguish which one is the Old World wine, which one is the New World wine. I've chosen 4 wines that are distinctly different from each other, even though they're the same varietal or type of wine. It should be fairly straightforward to determine when you taste it, even if you do it blind, which one is the Old World, which one is the New World. Of course, if you're not doing it blind, you just read the label, you figure it out that way. But I recommend doing it blind. And as we're getting together and seeing friends and kind of family again a little bit, have some people over, we're gonna do 2 Pinot Noirs, you can do them side by side, and then doing 2 Merlot Cab-based wines. You can do those side by side and do that all at once, or you could make 2 different occasions out of it. This kind of topic was a lot easier to do 20 years ago. And even before that, before I got into the wine business, probably even easier to do 30 and 40 years ago, because there was such a huge gap in terms of taste profile between Old World and New World wines, even when they're made with the same varietal. The wine world and the winemaking world has certainly gotten a lot more homogeneous over the years. You have California producers who make wines that taste more like wines from Bordeaux, and vice versa. You have a lot of Bordeaux producers who are making wines that appeal more to the American palate or the New World palate, and that could be like Australia as well. And that was especially prevalent in the 90s and early 2000s, especially in Italy, France, and Spain. You had a crop of new young winemakers who were trying to make bigger, bolder, more super extracted, oaky wines, because kind of that was the fad. And now it's swung back the other way a little bit. It's a little more balanced. And overall, the homogeneity of wine has been a good thing. There still is enough difference between everything. There is still definitely a sense of place for a lot of producers in terms of what types of wine they're producing and where they're producing the wine, to where you can still do this class and still get, yes, this is French, yes, this is Oregon. The one really positive thing about kind of winemaking techniques advancing and becoming a little more homogeneous is that you have a great improvement in quality, and there has been a great improvement in quality over the last 35 years. So to keep up, a lot of wineries and vineyards have kind of invested a lot of money in replanting vineyards, bringing in new technology, new winemaking techniques, and as a result, there's a lot less bad wine out there than there used to be. So that's a great thing. If you're making bad wine in today's world, you're not going to last very long, unless you're going for like super cheap and affordable, and then there's a little more wiggle room there, I guess. But so the homogeneity of wine has made the Old World, New World thing a little different, but it's still very relatively easy to do if kind of you know what you're looking for. So what do we mean, I guess, by Old World and New World? So in a very broad sense, and this is kind of what we're doing here, is Old World wines, and we're talking European wines. We're talking Spain, Italy, Germany, France, places like even Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary. So we're talking Western Europe, Eastern Europe, places that have been making wine for thousands and thousands of years. And traditionally, those wines have focused more on sense of place, and we'll get in terroir, and what does it mean to be a wine from Burgundy. Burgundy, for example, is the region of Burgundy. Having Burgundy or the villages or communes of Burgundy on your wine label is infinitely more important than the fact that that red wine is usually always made from Pinot Noir, or the white is always made usually from Chardonnay. The grapes are kind of a vehicle to produce the style that is Burgundy, if that kind of makes sense. They have tended to use less oak than their counterparts in Napa or Sonoma or in Columbia Valley or Horse Heaven Hills in Washington. And it tends to be kind of more about the grape and kind of getting the best expression of the grape. Less manipulation. In France, there is no actual literal translation for winemaker. I think the closest thing is vigneron. They'll call winemakers in France vigneron, which I'm badly mispronouncing. But basically that just means vine grower. And that's what a lot of old world, especially traditional old world producers, think of themselves as. We're kind of, and I've talked about this concept before, we're shepherding grapes to the bottle to make wine with minimal interference. And so in a lot of ways, especially with traditional European winemakers, that's still what winemaking is. Now, with New World, we're talking Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, of course, the United States, a lot of countries in South America, and that was a little different. And with New World wines, you're talking about the use of a lot of new oak. You're talking, again, this is very broad, very general, but you're talking more interference, more manipulation in terms of what the winemaker is doing to make the wine a certain style. And they tend to be bigger and bolder, creamy, a lot of vanilla. If you're talking white, say Chardonnays, for example. If you're talking like Sauvignon Blancs, very tropical, very grapefruity, and then if you're talking Pinot Noir and Cab, for the Pinots, they tend to be a little bigger than, say, Pinot Noir from Burgundy. They still will use a lot of oak for Pinot Noirs for the most part. Tend to get a little kind of riper, broader, more intense fruit flavors out of them. And then the Cab certainly as well, same extraction, more extraction, more body, more time in wood. So they're kind of souped up, so to speak. And again, there are producers on both sides that have kind of nixed those traditions and are kind of swapping what they're doing. But that's basically what Old World versus New World is. Old World, think about more sense of place. Where you're from is the most important. Whereas New World is more about what the winemaker is doing. So again, very broad explanation, but that's what we're talking about with Old World versus New World. So now let's get into the wines. All right, so first we're going to do a Pinot Noir comparison. So I picked Pinot Noir and then Cab Merlot based wines for our two Old World, New World. There's a number of ways we could have went. We could have done Syrah. We could have done Primitivo versus Zin. But in terms of reds, Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Merlot blends are the most popular all across the world in terms of consumption and sales, and then followed by Pinot Noir. So I just went with the two most popular reds. So first comparison we're going to do is Old World Pinot Noir versus New World Pinot Noir. And again, if you're doing these side by side, I think you'll be able to tell pretty quickly which is which if you're doing it blind. So the first thing, we're going to start with the Burgundy. So Burgundy is a region in France, which is known, world-renowned for their great Pinot Noirs. Burgundy, just a quick breakdown. It's impossible to do Burgundy in like under 5 minutes as a breakdown, but we're going to do like the Cliff Notes version of it. It is considered by many to be, along with possibly Germany, the most complex wine region in the world. But you can kind of simplify it to get the basics down. Burgundy is basically about 2 grapes. If it's from Burgundy and it's red, it's almost always Pinot Noir. There is Gamay in Burgundy, especially in Beaujolais. Beaujolais, administratively, Beaujolais is in a part of Burgundy, but as in wine culture, in the wine world, they're separate. They really don't have much in common. They're using different grapes, slightly different styles of wine. It's not, most people from Beaujolais would not consider themselves a part of Burgundy, especially in the winemaking world. So when we're talking Burgundy, if it's red, we're talking almost 100% Pinot Noir. And for white, it's mostly all Chardonnay. There's a few exceptions. There's another grape called Aligote that's grown in Burgundy that makes nice kind of crisp style white wines. There's a little area called Saint Brie that does a little bit of Sauvignon Blanc. And there are parts of Burgundy outside Beaujolais that do grow a little Gamay. But for the most part, Burgundy red, Pinot, Burgundy white Chard. There are 4 main communes, sorry for the counting there, in Burgundy, those being Chablis, the Côte d'Or, the Côte Chalonnais, and Mâconnais. Chablis, most people know, very northern part of Burgundy, renowned for their white wines. Again, Chardonnay, they tend to be very steely, very minerally. And then you have kind of what many people consider the creme de la creme as you head further south from Chablis of the world of Burgundy, which is the area known as the Côte d'Or. And the Côte d'Or is divided into 2 subregions, the Côte de Nuits and the Côte de Beaune. And then within the Côte de Nuits and the Côte de Beaune, you have a number of villages that we're going to get into just very briefly in a second. So in the Côte de Nuits, they are known mostly for reds. That's the premier, one of the premier Pinot Noir regions in the world. And we were talking villages like Vaux-Romany, Gevrey-Chambertin, Chambon-Musigny, Louis-Saint-Georges, Flège-Chazaux, Amaury-Saint-Denis. There's a number of others. Those are the big ones that produce, the greatest reds. And then there's like Fichin and Marsanais, which are a little lesser known. And then the Côte de Beaune is known for their fantastic Chardonnays. You have the villages of Pouligny-Montrachet, Merceau, Chassagne-Montrachet, Saint-Aubin. And these are very expensive and again, just highly sought after by wine collectors the world over. And then again, heading a little south from Côte d'Or, you have the Côte Chalonnais, where you can find some really good deals on. When I say really good deals, you're paying $30 to $50 to $60 instead of hundreds of dollars, but still, for Burgundy, a little better deal. So in the Côte Chalonnais, you're talking about like Montigny, Givry, Mercurey is probably the most well-known one, and then Rouy. And then as you go further south is Mâconnais. Mâconnais, think about Saint Véran or Puy-Foussay or Mâcon. That's where those wines come from. And those wines tend to offer even better value in terms of price to quality, as opposed to like the Côte d'Or or the Chablis, which you're gonna pay, through the nose for a lot of those wines. And then again, south of the Mâconnais is Beaujolais, but for our purposes, we're not really including Beaujolais as part of Burgundy. So that's a quick breakdown of Burgundy. We're going to be tasting specifically a wine from one of those great red villages, red producing villages in the Côte d'Or, so specifically in the Côte de Nuits. And we're going to be talking about this Georges Ligny et Fils, Chambon-Musigny. All right, so we're in the Côte d'Or, in that premier red and wine, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay making region of Burgundy, kind of the creme de la creme. We're specifically in a village of production called Chambon-Musigny. And because, why are wines broken down into like regions and sub-regions and then sub-sub-regions? We've gone over this a number of times, but each of these regions, each of these villages offer like something very specific in terms of style and taste. And so Chambol is considered among those great red wine making villages in the Côte de Nuit to be a region that produces Pinot Noirs with a lot of finesse, a lot of kind of what people would call like feminine. I'm not huge into, you know, gender specific wines, but by that they mean they tend to be silky, very perfumed, a lot of nice red fruit to them. And this is very broad again, of course, but Chambol is considered the most elegant of the villages when they're talking about Vaux-Romany, Maurice-Saint-Denis, Louis-Saint-Georges, Évry-Chambertin. Chambol is kind of the prettiest, I guess, is a way to put it. This is a village, like I keep calling it a village wine. And so also in each of these villages or in these communes, you have a little bit of a further breakdown of classifications where you can have just a basic Bourgogne. Well, it'll say Bourgogne across the label. You'll have a village wine like this wine, which is like a level above your basic Bourgogne and where the wines start really, really getting interesting. And it'll just have the name of the village on the label aside from the producer. But so it'll be Chambon-Moussigny or Évry-Chambertin or Meursault. Those are village wines. And then you'll get into Premier Cru. That's your next level. So Bourgogne, Village, Premier Cru. So Premier Cru will have Chambon-Moussigny on it, and then under the name of the village, it will have the name of the vineyard it comes from. So a Premier Cru is essentially a single vineyard wine that has the village on the label. And then the highest classification is Grand Cru, that doesn't have the village on it, it just has the vineyard. So like Bon Mar or Romanée-Conti or La Tâche. So just the vineyard, and that's it. And those are by far the most expensive. Some of those wines, when we're talking about producers like Domaine de la Romanée-Conti or like Armand Rousseau, which does like Clos de Bez and Chambertin, Grand Cru wines, can range from 800 to 1,000, even up to, when you're talking about Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, $6,000 a bottle. Well, the Tâche for about $4,000 or $5,000 a bottle. So each level gets significantly more expensive. And even the village wines get into, you know, you're mostly starting at $50, $60 and then getting up to $100, $150, sometimes even a little more depending upon who the producer is. So with Burgundy, we're talking obviously Chambon-Moussigny, we're talking Old World, and we're talking about a region that very much is steeped in terroir and sense of place. So again, Pinot Noir is the grape that they use in Chambol, but it's again more the vehicle that is the expression, that is the style that is Chambon-Moussigny. So let's get in it. Let's get into our Old World Pinot here. So this is, the producer is Georges Lignier, which is, the family Lignier is very, very well known. His cousin is Hubert Ligny. Hubert is probably he's a probably better known producer than Georges, but both are excellent. Both are also very different. Hubert Ligny's wine, or Lignier's wines tend to be a little bigger and broader than Georges. Georges' wines tend to be kind of more elegant. Georges is definitely a traditionalist, definitely more the old world guy, letting the grapes express themselves, which is one of the reasons why I picked it. So let's take a little sniff. Oh wow! So this is going to be definitely. This smells a little different than some of the Georges Lignier wines I've had in the past. Usually, they're very perfumed and exotic. This has actually got some old world funk on it. So this should be kind of an easy one to kind of pick out. It almost has like a slightly Louis-Saint-Georges smell to it. You still get the red fruit. You can tell if you look I mean, it's just kind of a light ruby color. It looks very much like Pinot Noir, but it smells a little different than other vintages I've had from Georges Lignier. Not in a bad way, but like I said, almost like a little funkiness. So on the palate, the funk goes away quite a bit. And I do get some earthy tones, which that funk usually indicates, but the earthiness I get on the palate is nowhere near what I smell. And the taste is very much Georges Lignier, especially his Chambolle. It's very pretty, nice red fruit, very silky, has a little bit of kind of tannin on the finish to it, but very slight, but it does dry the mouth out a little bit. It's got nice acidity to it as well, but it's the elegance of the wine that stands out. And the taste of this is very much in line with Lignier. This is something that would actually age pretty well. Yeah, so it's beautiful, it's delicious. Like I said, it's that elegance that really stands out on the palate. And that's what you want, and that's what to expect from Chambolle. The Village wine, he doesn't use any oak, or if he does, he does use oak, but it's old wood. He doesn't use, Georges Lignier only uses new oak when you get to his Premier Cru wines. For his Village wines, it's older wood. So you're talking about pretty much pure expression of fruit and place, and it's delicious. And it's a contrast to, if you love like big Pinots, like Belglas or Meiomi or Domaine Serene, and I'm just weirdly naming different wines, but this is the exact opposite of those. There's nuances to it. There's a lot of subtlety to it. It's not something that punches you in the face at all. It's a wine that you kind of sip, you think about a little bit, and it's just really wonderful. And as you're thinking about it, about an hour later, the bottle will be gone, and you realize, you're asking yourself what the heck happened to it. So a really delicious wine. If you don't want to drink this side by side, this is something you could, even it's a 2016 vintage, it's still something you could lay down for probably 5, 8, even 10 more years. But it's drinking well enough now where you can definitely drink it and enjoy it side by side. In terms of food pairings, you know, it would be great with chicken, some kind of roasted game bird would be fantastic with it. Pheasant, something along those lines. Cheese, something like, I would do like maybe a mild de Gruyere or Comté. Burgundy is very famous for their Poisse cheese, which is a funky washed rind cheese, which I love, but I think that would overpower this wine quite a bit. So I would stick more to like, think of your Alpine style cheeses, mountain cheeses, things like that. So enjoy Chambolle Old World Pinot Noir from Georges Lignier. What are we comparing the Georges Lignier Pinot Noir to? We're comparing it to 2018 Christum Mount Jefferson Cuvée. Christum is a fantastic winery out of Oregon. Again, specifically, we're talking about Willamette Valley. Oregon is, just like Burgundy is Pinot Noir country in France, Oregon is Pinot Noir country in the United States. And that's not to say other places, California makes fantastic Pinot Noir as well, but California is so diverse and makes so many different styles of wine, and has the advantages of such a fantastic climate. They can pretty much grow and be successful with any type of grape in the world, literally. And Oregon is almost on the same line of latitude as Burgundy. So the reason why I chose an Oregon winery is because Oregon, in terms of what's produced Pinot Noir wise in the US, is probably most similar to Burgundy. They also deal with some of the same climate difficulties that Burgundy does. You know, Oregon does not get nearly as warm as California. So there's a really tight window in terms of getting the most out of the Pinot Noir grape in Oregon. So it's kind of, Pinot Noir is a very difficult grape to work with. They're light skinned, they're prone to rot and fungus. And when you don't have perfect weather conditions, you can kind of be in trouble. You could lose some of your harvest, some of your grapes. There certainly have been vineyards in the past that have not been able to produce wines in certain vintages, or they produce a lot less wine in certain vintages, which can lead to slightly lesser quality, but also sometimes higher prices because of the quantity of wine that was produced. But for the most part, Oregon does a fantastic job, and they've become Pinot Noir experts and produce some of the best Pinots in the world. So we're talking about Christum, fantastic winery. These guys are biodynamic. They're natural wine growers. They are actually, in a lot of ways, have old world sensibilities, but the wine is still kind of new world in terms of nose and taste. They do whole cluster fermentation, which a lot of great Pinot producers do. What do we mean by whole cluster fermentation? Well, it is what it sounds like. You don't pick the individual grapes, you're picking the actual bunch of grape off the vine, so with the stem and everything, and you're throwing them into a vat and you're fermenting everything together. So why would you do whole cluster fermentation versus just kind of grape fermentation? And why wouldn't you destem? That seems counterintuitive, but it's not. Actually, doing whole cluster fermentation adds more complexity to the wine. Believe it or not, just like grapes, stems ripen as well. So an expert winemaker or an expert vineyard manager, probably more appropriately, has to be aware of not only the ripeness and the Brix level of the grapes, but also where the stems are in ripe. The downside with whole cluster fermentation is if you pick too early, if you pick the clusters too early, you get green, stemmy wine. And for Pinot Noir, that is terrible. That's kind of like the worst, outside of rot and fungus and losing vineyards to some disease, green Pinot Noir is not good. Green Cabernet Franc is okay, green Pinot Noir not so much. But Christum does 5 single vineyards, and then the Mount Jefferson Cuvée is actually a blend of a number of their 5 vineyard sites. And we're talking natural too. They actually used native yeasts for their fermentation process, which also makes them a natural wine producer. So let's get into some Christum Mount Jefferson Cuvée 2018. So a lot of red berry, good fruit. And really gorgeous wine. Very elegant. There's a ripeness to it still, though, that kind of gives you that sense of where that New World wine is coming from. So while this isn't as apparent as, say, like a Belglas or a Walt, or even other wineries from Oregon, like Ken Wright or Domaine Serene, those are big kind of burlier Pinots that use quite a bit more new oak and wood and stuff like this. Christum is like New World with slightly Old World sensibility, but still very much New World flavors. So they're kind of straddling that line and do it very well. Yeah, that's great. Every year the Mount Christum is a fantastic wine. And the other reason why, one of the reasons why I picked specifically Mount Christum is because I've actually thrown Mount Christum into blind tastings before with Pinot Noirs that are not only from different regions, but tend to be much more expensive than it. And it's usually like a little ringer of a wine. It's not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, but price to quality wise, it is always fantastic. So enjoy the Christum, taste it next to the Burgundy, see if you kind of get the differences between Old World, New World, And there are similarities, and there should be similarities. They're both Pinot Noir. So both of these producers are trying to get the most out of the grape and a sense of place. And the reason why I love this comparison so much is because without a lot of manipulation, these wines are telling you where they're from, just based on the grape alone. This is New World, this is Oregon, this is very Oregon wine in terms of style. This is Chambolle, this is Burgundy, this is very Chambolle, Burgundian in style. Different, similar, best of all worlds. Enjoy. Now we're getting into the second grouping of our Old World, New World standoff. This time we're going to reverse the order a little bit. We're going to go New World first and Old World. So for our first wine, for our New World wine, we have the Green Wing Cabernet Sauvignon from Columbia Valley. It's actually a blend of Cab, Merlot, and Syrah. It's not 100% Cab. And two reasons why I picked a wine from Washington as opposed to, again, California, Napa, Sonoma, Paso Robles. I could have went any of those directions as well. Was again a little bit geographical. Washington is actually on almost the same line of latitude that Bordeaux is. So again, we're dealing with fairly similar climates. And then also, Washington does, it might be an overstatement, but a bit more blending than I guess California Cabernet wine producers do, but they're more Bordeauxish in style. They tend not to have 100% Cabernet Sauvignon. They tend to do a lot of Merlot, some Cab Franc, some Syrah, like in this one, with the Cabernet. So very similar to Bordeaux in that fashion. Bordeaux doesn't blend Syrah. That's not one of the 5 grapes that are allowed in production of red Bordeaux. But the Syrah aside, a lot of the best reds in Washington are Cabernet-based blends or Merlot-based blends, much like they do in Bordeaux. So that's why I chose Washington. There's a number of wineries I could have chosen. Washington does outstanding Cab and Merlot-based blends. I chose Green Wing it's a great wine. It's also a project of Duckhorn. So a lot of people are very familiar with the Napa Valley producer, Duckhorn, very famous. And Green Wing is kind of the little quiet project that they do in Washington. It's a Columbia Valley AVA, so the viticultural area within Washington is Columbia Valley. Washington has like 13 AVAs, I believe, and like 11 of them are in Columbia Valley. So within Columbia Valley is huge. And then within Columbia Valley, you have Yakima, you have Walla Walla, you have like Red Mountain, you have Horse Heaven Hills, Waluki Slope. So yeah, almost all the wine produced in Washington comes from Columbia Valley. So we'll taste the Green Wing. So I get a little bit of oak, a lot of berries, kind of more cassis, a little red berry. It's definitely got kind of a slightly riper New World nose. So I get oak, I get sherry, I get some tannin, but it's softer. It's drinking really well right now. This is a 2017 vintage. Yeah, it's really well done. It's really well balanced. Although you get the oakiness, although you get the ripeness, there's nothing that kind of overpowers the wine. Yeah, that's just a really well made, well balanced wine. This is something I would pair with a filet, maybe some venison, a little leg of lamb. This is really quite a delicious little wine. But like I said, it's not gonna hit you over the head. So again, like with the Christum, and as we're staying with the Pacific Northwest, it's got a balance to it. It's got like a sensibility of, we're not over trying, we're not over manipulating, but we're still very New World in our approach and our style. So enjoy it. I hope you like it as much as I do. It's something we do carry in the store fairly regularly, but it's just a cool little project from Duck Horn I wanted to include in this tasting. So I thought it's an excellent example of like good Washington State wine, and it'll be good compare and contrast with our next wine. So our comparison now to the Green Wing, the New World Merlot Cab Syrah blend from Duck Horn out of Columbia Valley, is going up against the Chateau Marceau 2015 vintage, which is a Côte de Bordeaux, specifically a Franc Côte de Bordeaux. So where are we talking about in Bordeaux? So Bordeaux, we're talking main regions. If you remember, I've explained this in other classes or other places or whatever, but you have an estuary, Gironde and Dordogne River, kind of cuts Bordeaux in half, or cuts Bordeaux in two, I should say. And then you have the left bank and the right bank. So in the left bank, you have regions like Pauillac, Saint-Julien. So we're talking Médoc, Côte-Médoc, Saint-Estèphe, Margaux, Pessac-Léognan. And then the right bank, the very famous regions are Pomerol and Saint-Emilion. And so Franc, Côte de Bordeaux Franc, falls almost in that kind of, in the Saint-Emilion satellite regions. That's only 4 or 5 kilometers east of Saint-Emilion. So we're talking right bank here. So we're talking mostly Merlot here. So a little different makeup than the Washington wine, but still, like stylistically, we're still talking kind of, we're in the same ballpark here. And this is a new discovery for us, the Chateau Marceau at Bregard Market over the last year or so. And I love this wine. 2015 was a great vintage. Côte de Bordeaux Franc is a tiny region and is made up mostly of red and gray clay in terms of soil types, which is why you get Merlot. Merlot loves clay soils, especially red clay, and that's why that's the predominant grape on the east bank and in this region in particular. So let's taste this and do a little comparison. Yeah, so where I got some ripe fruit and oak in the Green Wing, the Columbia Valley, I do get some nice fruit here, but I get definitely more leather, like almost like scorched earth. If it gets a little too scorchy, that could be not so great, but this is just kind of like a subtle smokiness almost. It smells just as much. It's almost, yeah, and it's got like a little meaty gaminess. This is great. This is drinking so fantastic right now. It's still got some structure, still got some tannin. It's got good life into it. I get the fruit. I get a little bit of that scorched earthiness. I definitely get some of that gaminess I talked about earlier. If you look at the color, if you kind of tip your glass, sometimes you could tell where a wine is in its kind of life cycle by the color. Is sometimes a good indicator, especially when you're talking about like Merlot or Cab Franc. They tend to be deeper when they're younger, deeper, darker colors, like a deep dark red or even purple sometimes, and whatever you call the colors in between that. And as they get older, they take on, especially around the rims and edges, kind of a red brick, almost tawny color. And this isn't tawny yet, but you're getting more of that red brick color on the rim of this particular wine. So this isn't a wine I would hold for another 5-6 years. This is a wine I would really enjoy and drink over the next 2 or 3 years. Or now. Yes, please. This is, it's just so good. I love the fruit, the game, the earthiness. Again, a lot of people love oak. A lot of people love super cassis, black fruity flavors, ripe. I love balance. Balance is always something I look for in a really well-made wine, even if it's not a wine I necessarily like, in terms of fruit, to acidity, to, if you're talking about red wine, usually tannin and structure, muscularity, and how those things are integrated together. That's just my own personal choice. But that's always what I look for in a well-made wine. What is the balance? I don't necessarily want anything to hit me over the head. I just want kind of like this beautiful, seamless amalgamation of flavors. And that's what I get out of the Chateau Marceau. This would be perfect with this. I would do more kind of a ribeye or a strip, or this would be beautiful with rack of lamb. Bordeaux and lamb is classic, or leg of lamb even, this would be fantastic with. But for something a little different in terms of Bordeaux, and Bordeaux, you know, a lot of those big regions in the West Bank, or the left bank, excuse me, and the right bank, are just getting pricier and pricier every year. You can still find good value in Bordeaux. By good value, I'm talking $30 to $50 range. You can even find some great Bordeaux in the, still find some great Bordeaux in the $20 to $25 range. So, but you're looking for kind of alternative regions. So, you know, satellites of Saint-Emilion, like Montagne Saint-Emilion, or this little Franc Côte de Bordeaux, or satellite regions that are by Pomerol, but not necessarily actually in Pomerol, like Lalande Pomerol. Or on the West Bank, you're looking for like, you know, Cru Bourgeois wines in the Medoc and Haut Medoc that are right outside of those areas like Pauillac and Saint Julien. It's not always easy. Hopefully you have like a sommelier at a restaurant you trust, or a friendly neighborhood wine retailer who you trust for that type of stuff. Or, you know, it's doing a little research on yourself. But when you find those kind of alternative producers that have fantastic wines that you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars on, it's just really fantastic, especially when they can be, like the Chateau Marceau, so representative of what Bordeaux is. This is very old world in terms of its flavor profile and how the wine just kind of drinks and ages over X amount of years. The secondary flavors are outstanding on that wine. So enjoy the Chateau Marceau, and kind of I'll be interested to see what people feel in terms of what their preferences were between the Green Wing and the Chateau Marceau. A couple of things here in conclusion. So I had a lot of fun picking these wines, as I usually do. But the old world, new world thing's a little tricky because you're always wondering, should I go like, yes, this is definitely new world because it's oaky and creamy and has all this fruit and manipulation to it. And I've done that in the past, but as things have been changing and as the wine world has been evolving, I wanted to kind of display 4 wines that kind of had very much a sense of place and region, but were not overly manipulated, but still, this is Oregon, this is Burgundy, yeah, this is Washington, this is New World, and this is Chateau Marceau, this is right bank, you know, satellite Saint-Emilion style of wine. So I hope you enjoyed the wines. The other interesting thing I would want to tell you is that I'm curious to see, there's one wine in here that is vastly differently priced than another, than actually all 3 of them. So there's one kind of standout sleeper that's priced way above the other 3. And I'm just curious, if you want to leave a note in the YouTube stuff, I do look at that. I don't like to look at myself on camera, but I'd love to hear from you, like via email, or if I see it in the store. Not only comparing old world versus new world, but I'd be curious to see if anyone, what people think in terms of picking out the wine, which of these, based on taste, you think is kind of the one that's way outpriced on the others. So it's another reason why I love doing these things blind. I also picked a wine in there that's a ringer in the other direction. So I picked a wine that is, again, not inexpensive, but reasonably priced for what it is, and always beats out the more expensive wines. I've done this a number of times with the same winery, and I'll put this winery in with wines that are like $70, $80, $90. And this wine that I'm talking about now, that I'm not telling you what it is like $30. And it constantly beats out wines that are 2 or 3 times its price. So just an interesting thing to know as you're tasting. See if you kind of pick out which one is the super high priced one and which one is kind of the less expensive ringer that kind of always beats out the higher end stuff, because it's been pretty consistent for the last, at least over the last 10 years. I've kind of mixed this wine into the lineup at least 4 times, probably 5 or 6 times, and it's always. And that's the other great thing about doing this blind is that, and we'll do this type of tasting when we get back to in-store tastings, which will hopefully be very soon. But I love when you don't see the label and you don't see where it's from, and you just taste the wine for the wine itself, and you kind of like, oh, I like this one, I like that one, and it's always, the results are always interesting. Rarely does the most expensive wine win. It's usually kind of something in the middle somewhere. But so good luck. Let me know if you pick out the super expensive one and if you pick out the less expensive ringer. And I hope you enjoyed the tasting as much as I did, and we'll talk to you soon.